Ladies and gentlemen, it is Late Night Talk episode 13. Welcome back, guys. So what I wanted to talk about first today is something that obviously happened last night, but never really got a whole lot of buzz or people really, talking about it until really today. So might as well get this out of the way now. So basically, Malik Hooker, talked about how Micah Parsons should be fourth in line to get paid. Now, first off, I just want to say I don't know why he's got to be the fourth in line to get paid, because where is the fourth guy in the first place? Like, where did four come from? Now, obviously, that's rhetorical. I know who the other guy is. We're over here thinking that it's the trio of CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, and Dak Prescott, when really it's really the quadruple of CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons, and Zach Martin. But Zach Martin should not be an extra guy who we should be thinking about paying. I mean, the dude said himself, not too long ago that I don't know if, after this season I'll be able, that I'm going to play another year, going through all the wear and tear of my body. I don't know if, it would, I don't know if I would be able to play another year, so a guy who's already contemplating retirement is definitely not a guy that I would want to take my chances on wanting to pay when he already has thoughts about retirement. You don't be the LA Rams, who they signed Aaron Donald to a new contract after the Super Bowl, and then of course later on, he would end up retiring, this year, when he still had like 2 or 3 years left on his contract. So now, because of him being Aaron Donald, and being everything that he had been for that organization, even with him retiring, now they owe him, like, I don't know how much money, but they owe him a bit. They owe him quite a bit, that's for sure. So, even in retirement, they still owe him quite a bit. So, yeah, you don't want to be the LA Rams. You don't want to put yourself in that situation. So, yeah, trying to pay a guy who's already contemplating retirement is not a guy that I want to put on my list of guys that I should be paying. Because the fact of the matter is, Zach Martin's 35. And, why am I trying to give him, a new contract, give him, more money? If he's willing to take, the veteran minimum, if he's willing to take a small pay cut, or whatever to stay, then that's cool, but don't expect to still be getting paid top guard in the NFL type money when you're 35 years old. I think finna turn 36 at some point this year. So I'm just saying, we already got a young TJ Bass, the undrafted free agent from last year, and the 6th-round pick in Nathan Thomas at a University of Lafayette, who we got this draft. So that could be a potential guy who could, like replace you. So I'm just saying, why am I trying to pay a dude, quite a bit of money at 38 years old? What can he do at 38 years old that probably my guy who's right behind him at 23, 24 years old can't do? So either way, that's pretty much little segment that I wanted to speak on as far as the Zach Martin thing. Like, I don't know where Zach Martin came from as far as guys that are on the list to get, paid, but it is what it is. So, either way, yeah, Malik Hooker talked about how he believes that Micah Parsons needs to be fourth in line to get paid. And and actually it's not even that. It's not even that. It was what he said about his podcast. Now there's a lot of, speculation. I was watching Undisputed, them trying to accuse Keyshawn of setting Malik Hooker up, trying to set him up to say something. When I'm going to be honest, in actuality, like, that really wasn't the case. Like, Keyshawn was just asking him a question. And once Malik opened his mouth and started saying some stuff, like Keyshawn said in the Undisputed Topic episode, he tried to bring him back a little bit. He tried to bring him back because, Malik was slowly starting to talk himself off an edge a little bit. However, I think that was still discussing the topic of, when should Micah get paid, I think. And then Malik responded with saying that he believes that Micah should get, be fourth in line to get paid. And let me just say that, look, you don't want to mess with nobody's money, like, that's just where I'm from, like, I mean, number one rule, like, you just don't mess with, somebody else's money and get into their business as far as, when do they deserve to get paid, and saying that he deserves to get paid fourth, last in line. Like, I just don't think you do those type of things, but it is what it is. What I do want to say is Malik Hooker basically talked about how, like, Keyshawn asked him about what does he think about Micah Parsons' podcast. And Malik basically said, hey, look, I think it's cool, like, do what you want to do. Like, I mean, like, when we're winning, it's all cool and stuff. But when we're losing and we're out there getting our tails kicked against the run, and you want to be out there, doing a podcast, it's like, are you truly, like, with the team? Do you really care about the concerns about the run defense? Because are you truly, like, all in with the rest of the team as far as trying to, win a championship? Or are you just about the crowd, the audience, in the stream when you do your little podcast and stuff? And basically Micah said, hey, look, if you had this problem with me and this, podcast that I'm doing, if you had this problem and made it such a, like, concern and such an issue that you could have talked to me, man to man about that, you didn't have to go out and really like almost kind of like contradictive a little bit, being literally on a podcast talking about somebody else's podcast. I would say, talking about how big of an issue that it is that he's doing that. And you are literally on a podcast speaking publicly about, your, issues with another teammate on your team about him doing a podcast. And look, the fact of the matter is, I want to, I'm a person who normally likes to be neutral on these type of subjects, especially when it pertains to the team and it pertains to, players. And I will say that from some cowboy content creators that I watched today, that I will say that, a majority of them, did side with, Micah, and did, feel like Malik Hooker was wrong, and especially CFT, like he said that, Malik was wrong for that. And here's the thing. I like to be more on the neutral side, like I don't like to be like one-sided, be on one side and leave the other side neglected, especially when it's my team, like, I mean, players that, obviously play for my favorite team. Like, I mean, I'm not going to try to, like divide two players, on the team like that. I like to keep it neutral. So what I will say is I feel like Malik Hooker was right, for saying what he said about how Micah, and I will admit, I've had a little bit of a problem with Micah and the podcast that he does too. I will admit, like I've never, proclaimed it much before in past videos, but I will come out right now and say that I will say that I've had a little bit of an issue and a problem with Micah, doing the podcast as well. Mainly, I have a problem with him doing those podcasts after a loss, after we just got our ASS kicked. That's really where I have a problem with him, after we just got done getting our tails kicked. Kind of similar to what Malik Hooker was talking about. Like, it's all cool, fine and dandy to, do the podcast, like when we're winning. But after a loss, after we get our tails whooped, and mainly we didn't just get whooped like they were just the better team. No, you got whooped physically. You got whooped. You got whooped at the line of scrimmage basically because you couldn't stop the run, and that's a major problem. And then you're gonna go out on your freaking podcast and try to talk about sports and talk about football like everything's all fine and dandy, like we didn't just literally get our tails whooped. So in a way, I do have a problem with that, but I'm just a fan. I have every right to feel that way if I want to, but when you're a player, when you're a teammate of his, and you are a teammate in the locker room with that player, matter of fact, as Micah mentioned, a player that you literally roomed right next to in the locker room, you can't have those type of thought processes. Or at least if you are, have a man-to-man conversation. And that's where I will say that he is kind of wrong. You shouldn't have like said that out there in the public eye to see. Because you do realize, Malik, that the media is finna eat this up. They're finna eat this up. They're finna eat this like Ezekiel Elliott ate that bowl of cereal that one time in that one Dallas Cowboys skit a long time ago. Like, they are finna eat this up, fam. So, I mean, like, it's not right, you know? Like, in my experience, like, I played football before, like, I played Little League, I played middle school, and then throughout high school. You know, I played football before. And yes, obviously I never, like played it at a high level, like even collegiate level, and professional level and stuff like that. But, like, so you're not being on talk shows or talking to the media and answering questions like this. But you do get asked by like peers and friends and whatever, like at, like school about, certain players on your team and, like get asked about like, how do you feel about this said player, like, and the struggles. And if you just come out and be like, hey, look, you know, um, I just feel like he needs to work on his decision making, Like, if I just come out and just be straight up and say, "Hey, listen, I think that he needs to work on his decision making a little bit because sometimes I feel like he has some misreads." Somebody's gonna tell somebody, and then that somebody's gonna tell. You know how it works in school and whatever, like y'all been in school before, like it's gossip. So they'll tell somebody who will tell that person. They find out, and like there's gonna be problems ensuing in the locker room. You being like, hey, how you finna just put me out on blast like that to some people, like you can't really say those type of things. You gotta be like, you kind of just have to like either don't answer the question or just be like, hey, it's a process, like we're just trying to work on some things, and we understand how important he is to this team, stuff like that. Like, I can't, come out and just say he needs to work on his decision making and whatever. I mean, while everybody does need a little bit of constructive criticism, at the same time, you just don't like, that's something that you need to like have a man-to-man conversation about, Like, you can't just go out in public and say to somebody or millions or thousands of people that watch that, and say something like that. You just can't. And that's where I feel like he was wrong. So, I mean, Micah and, Malik, might have, definitely had that conversation on the phone at least, by then, and maybe have talked and hopefully hashed things out to the best of their ability, you know. But I will say that, listen, is this a problem? I mean, I don't think it's that big of a problem. I know a lot of people are going to try to overreact this and say, oh my gosh, Malik Hooker calling Micah Parsons out and Micah, responding, clashing right back at him like, oh my gosh, it's going to ruin the culture. It's going to ruin the aura of the team and the aura of the locker room and da 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 da. Like, I mean, look, I'm not going to overreact a situation unless it truly boils over. Like, if these guys like start fighting or really like getting into disagreements during practice, like if this is just something that just happens in the moment, on social media, on Twitter, like, and that's it, then that's it, like, not gonna overreact the situation. Now, if this carries over to the practice field, if this carries over to training camp during practice, and they're out there and Micah and Malik are out there fighting, or having disagreements out there on the field and things get a little hectic, then okay, I think at that point it's time to start to overreact a little bit and start to maybe freak out a little bit about the drama ensuing across the team, and just the whole like team morale, so to speak. But until then, I'm just gonna look at this as a little small thing that happened on social media, and hopefully, like they talk things out and everything's good. If it ain't good, like I said, if they're fighting, they're having disagreements out there on the practice field, like come training camp, then yeah, then at that point it's time to start, freaking out a little bit about the culture of the team. But either way, that's really all I wanted to say about that. Last thing I wanted to, talk about for this late night talk video, this late night talk episode. Last thing I want to, discuss, I want to do a ranking of all five Dallas Cowboy, Super Bowl champions. Like I'm a rank them all from, from bottom to top. So at number 5, I have to put the 1971 Dallas Cowboys at number 5. Out of all 5 of our Super Bowl champions, out of all 5 of our Super Bowl rings, I would argue and say that was the weakest one of them all. It was the first one, but it certainly was not the best one. I mean, don't get me wrong, like people will say, like we dominated in that Super Bowl over Don Shula and the Miami Dolphins. But I mean, you got to take into account that Miami Dolphins team was young and upstart team. We were the ones with the experience, and we're just in the Super Bowl the year before that I thought we should have won the Super Bowl. But, I mean, granted, I wasn't born obviously at the time, not even close. But I'm just saying, like, as far as like seeing that team, and when I look at some of the stuff, like, and then I look at Baltimore, like, yeah, they were definitely not as good. So we really should have won the year before. Like, there were just so many turnovers, so many mistakes. But yeah, the first Super Bowl, like, I mean, our offense was number 1 in the league that year, and then our defense was like 6th or 7th, I believe. We were number 1 in takeaways. This was through the regular season, mind you. This was through the regular season. And we did win, 9 straight games. We went on a 9-game winning streak after starting a mediocre 4-3 to start the season, after the loss on Halloween to the Chicago Bears, you know, went on a 9-game win streak, including dismantling the Miami Dolphins 24-3 in the Super Bowl. But when you really look at it, other than that game where, by the way, our run game went off for 252 yards, overall, I mean, in the playoffs, the offense really wasn't really like that great. I mean, we scored 20 points against Minnesota, and then 14 against San Francisco, and then 24 against Miami. But what I saw was a defense that just totally rose to the occasion and just went out there and hammered opponents in the second half of the season and then even the postseason, holding the Vikings to 12 points and then holding the 49ers to 3 points and then doing the same exact thing to Bob Greasy and the Dolphins in the Super Bowl. So our defense was just clicking on all cylinders by the second half of the season. And from that point forward, they were just true monsters. I mean, they were doomsday, you know? But the offense, I will say, was definitely lagging behind. And it was the first Super Bowl, and it was like, I mean, just, yeah, we didn't look truly that dominant in the playoffs. We looked dominant defensively, but not really like overall as a team, you know. So I'll put the 71 Cowboys at 5. Now at number 4, I'll put the 1995 Dallas Cowboys, the last time we won the Super Bowl in January of 1996 over the Pittsburgh Steelers. It just felt like, you know, like, if y'all seen Michael Jordan's documentary, The Last Dance, it kind of felt like that. It was truly like The Last Dance. Like, it just felt like the team was just, as D-Law would say, mentally fatigued. You know, they were just mentally fatigued and they just couldn't handle the pressure and intensity of and mental focus that went throughout a season, you know, throughout. You know, Jimmy did a wonderful job of doing that in the early going, but then he resigned because him and Jerry, you know, had some tiffs or whatever. And then Barry Switzer came in. And the fact of the matter is he already had a team that was already great, you know, when he came in. And he just took, you know, the scraps of what was left. And then I will say that he made some, you know, acquisitions and improvements of his own, like drafting Larry Allen. And then, of course, you know, signing Deion Sanders. Now, granted, I don't think Barry obviously didn't sign Deion Sanders. Jerry did, but you know that was that was the final move that really moved the needle for us to get back into Super Bowl contention. And then 95, we took it and ran with it. But I mean, no mistake about it. I mean, you and I can watch that team and see how that team did not look very dominant. I mean, they were still good. I mean, they still managed to get through the playoffs because they were still that good and that stacked of a roster. But you and I could both see it that team was just not the same. They were just not at the same dominant level as they had been in past years. I mean, even like, you know, there were points in December where they didn't look that great. I mean, back-to-back losses to the lowly Washington Redskins and then the Philadelphia Eagles and then barely beating the Giants, who finished last in the division that year. It took 5 field goals by our kicker to win that game. Like, I mean, we did not look very sharp, and then we just happened to turn it on right before the playoffs, against, the Cardinals, and then we just took it and just, we were back on track. We dominated the Eagles in the divisional round, and then we actually got into a nip and tuck game with the Packers in the championship game. At one point they were actually winning, but thanks in large part to the Packers, of course, their inexperience, still being very inexperienced, and Favre being very inexperienced, they knew that, Favre was going to throw him one. It was going to make a mistake, because his experience just wasn't there. So he did throw an interception, and then, we took it and ran with it literally and put the game away and wound up escaping and winning to go to the Super Bowl. And then the Super Bowl itself against Pittsburgh, that game started off with us having full control. We were up 13-0. It could have been potentially 17-0, but then the referee did throw a flag for a push off on Michael Irvin. But it is what it is. That was a 4-point swing. But yes, because we were up 13-0, and it looked like it was about to be another one of those typical Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl blowouts. But for the first time, it actually wasn't that. We allowed Pittsburgh to get back into that game. We allowed their sorry tails to get back in that football game and let them hang around all the way to the end. But Neil O'Donnell threw a couple interceptions to Larry Brown that allowed us to pull away with a couple short fields to put that game away and win 27-17. Gotta give credit to Neil O'Donnell, because without him, we probably would have never won that Super Bowl, to be quite honest with you. But yes. So I have the 1995, the last Dallas Cowboy team to win a Super Bowl, at number 4, second to last. Then at number 3, I have the 1993 Dallas Cowboys. Basically, the Dallas Cowboys were, just coming off of winning the Super Bowl, and it was basically, a mirror image of themselves from the year before a little bit. They just ran it back and dominated the Bills again. I will say that Buffalo did have control of that first half, but then, Jimmy got us back in gear and we dominated the second half. So, but I mean, basically, that season, we went 12-4 and still got in. As much as it looked like our, record, even though that was still a good record, we could have been even better if Emmett didn't come into the season a little bit late because of the contract dispute and him holding out. And so we started the year 0-2. And then he came back, and it's like we never looked back, So basically just handling business, and going out, running it back, and winning 2 in a row. That's pretty much what it is, dominating the Packers in the divisional round, and then dominating the Niners, and then dominated the Bills. Every single game was pure dominance. So that was my biggest takeaway from that 1993 postseason. Every single game was absolute annihilation. But and speaking of, Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl runs were just straight up annihilation, Let's talk about number 2, the 1977 Dallas Cowboys. Now, for some old heads, like they might argue and say that this was the best Dallas Cowboy team ever assembled, or this was just the best Super Bowl Cowboys team. But I just think that there's just another one that obviously y'all know who it's going to be that I just felt like it was a little bit better. Now, one thing that I will say that you can't take away from the 1977 Dallas Cowboys when you look at the stats, they were number 1 in overall offense. They were number 1 in overall defense. The only time in Dallas Cowboy history that we've managed to pull something off like that. Number 1 in offense, number 1 in defense, and we were probably number 1 in special teams as well. But yes, and we went 12-2, number 1 seed. The thing is, though, is that the competition was pretty weak. I ain't gonna lie. That was really how I separated this 77 Cowboys team with of course, the team at number 1. I separated the two teams because I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of close. But the way I separated it was competition-wise, like who did you have to beat? And I will say the 77 Cowboys, the competition in the playoffs wasn't all that. I mean, in the divisional round, they had to face the Walter Payton led Chicago Bears. Literally, the Walter Payton led Chicago Bears in the divisional round. I mean, they really didn't have anybody else outside of Walter Payton that was really righting the ship. So it was either Walter Payton or bust. So yeah, we made sure to take care of Walter Payton. And as long as we took care of him, everything else was going to take care of itself, because let's face it, the Chicago Bears were not a very good team that year. So yes, we dominated them 37-7, and then we played the Minnesota Vikings, a old, aging Minnesota Vikings team that clearly by this point was a complete shell of themselves. Yes, they were just in the Super Bowl the year prior, but this team just aged like they freaking aged like milk. I mean, they went from being in the Super Bowl to looking like a team that literally was just a complete shell of themselves the next year, barely getting into the playoffs. Fran Tarkenton got hurt near the end of the season, so they had their backup quarterback playing at the end of the season and in the playoffs. They upset the Rams in the divisional round just to get the snot knocked out of them in the NFC Championship game against us. And then we played the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl, which Craig Morton he's okay. He's a decent quarterback, and I guess that defense was pretty good, the Orange Crush defense. But I mean, let's make no mistake about it, like that Denver Broncos team was not at the level of us. And we knew, I think that team was pretty confident that, as far as the outcome of how that game was going to go. And yeah, it was a coronation. The only time in NFL history that we've seen two players win Super Bowl MVP, co-MVP. But, Randy White and Harvey Martin. But, that team was obviously special. But the 1992 Dallas Cowboys was just a little more special. Just look at the competition and look at who you had to beat in the playoffs. This is one thing that the Dallas Cowboys of today's, era, I feel like lack thereof, In the playoffs, when you meet the best teams, that is where you bring your absolute best, your A game. And that's what this 92 Cowboys team did. You know, they beat the Philadelphia Eagles, who were not too shabby themselves, you know, that season. We stuck a fork in them, you know, beating them 34-10. Then you had to play the 49ers, who, you know, they're still, you know, like riding high on what they had done in the 80s and that being the team of the decade. And they still had quite a few of their core players still on that team. And they had league MVP Steve Young. And we were on the road in that soupy, soggy, freaking bad excuse for a sad excuse, you know, for a football field that the 49ers had during that time. And we made some adjustments in the second half and started to pull away. You know, it wasn't really domination, to be honest. I mean, that was a pretty close game to the end. And I mean, for very good reason. I mean, the 49ers were still a really good team. They had the best record in the NFL that year at 14-2. So, and we pulled away and we won the game, you know, being a young, rising up and coming team. And the Niners were the ones with the experience that they felt like we were going to fold and the Niners were going to be going to the Super Bowl. But that was not the case. And then we played Buffalo, who, speaking of experience in big games like this, we obviously were a young team who this was our first time being in this situation before. Meanwhile, Buffalo has been here twice in a row, even though they lost twice in a row. So you almost kind of had a feeling that maybe this is, you know, Buffalo's time. But no, we absolutely just annihilated them, buried them. You know, after we got our little first date jitters out of the way in the first quarter, basically from that point forward, it was all Big Blue. You know, it was all Dallas from that point forward. So yeah, that is my ranking of all 5 Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl champions. At number 5, I have the 71 Cowboys. At 4, I have the 95 Cowboys. At 3, I have the 93 Cowboys. At number 2, I have the 77 Cowboys. And at number 1, probably the best Dallas Cowboy team ever by far in team history, the 1992 Dallas Cowboys. So let me know, y'all. So basically, to close, we talked about how Zach Martin doesn't deserve to get paid a new contract at his age, especially when he's contemplating retirement. Malik Hooker was right and wrong at the same time for some of the comments that he said about Micah in Keyshawn Johnson's podcast. And I did my little, you know, ranking, you know, discussion of all 5, you know, Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl champions. So, you know, let me know y'all's thoughts and opinions on this. Especially let me know y'all's thoughts and opinions on this, you know, little ranking discussion. And that's pretty much it, you know. To all my audience, to all of Cowboys Nation, leave a like and subscribe. This is Late Night Talk, episode 13, and we are out.